Hello and thanks for checking out AdonisJs. I'm on work, and in this video I'm going to give you a nice tour of the framework. Now this video is not about learning the framework or becoming master about it, but instead we're going to solve a very simple problem and check the capabilities of the framework. So I have installed and created a brand new application. So if I start the server by saying npm run dev and open it inside the browser here, you can see I get the home page. So what we're going to do in this video is we're going to build a simple HTML form, and using that form we're going to create multiple users. Now it sounds really simple, but ideally it's not, because there are a couple of hurdles whenever you want to create multiple entries from a single HTML form. So let's talk about them. The very first one is getting data the right way. Now, what I mean by that, we're going to check it out. The next hurdle is validating the data. So what we're going to get is an array of data in it, and in order to validate that, we need to run a loop. Now, running a loop just to make sure that fields are there or whether it's a valid email or not is fine. But when you want to get into the process of checking the username and the email with the database, you have to get into async loops, which is not fun. So the second hurdle is validating data, and the final one is saving data to the database. Okay, so we're basically gonna solve all these three hurdles in like 10 to 15 lines in AdonisJs. So let's open the routes file. This is the place where everything gets started. I'm going to take out these comments from here so that we have some room to work with. Now, the brand new application of Adonis will have a route which will render the welcome view, something that you can see out here. We will let it be there, but we are going to modify it. Apart from that, we're going to register another route. Okay, they're going to say post user, and we're going to handle this route using the method called store on the user controller. Okay, so let's quickly create this controller and write some code. In order to create the controller, I'm going to make use of the command line utility called ACE. So in every Adonis project, if you will say ACE, you can see the list of all the available commands that you can run inside your terminal. So what we're going to make use of called make controller, and the name of the controller we want to create, it's user. Now you can see a file called user controller has been created. So if I go to my editor, I can see the user controller out here. Next, we're going to create the store method, which will handle the request for us. So I'm going to say request response and leave it empty for now. The next thing is to modify the view called welcome and basically create an HTML form inside it. So if I go to the views directory, which is inside resources, and open the welcome view, let's get rid of all this and simply start by creating a div called row and a couple of HTML elements inside it. So I'm going to say form field. We would need a label input inside it. So whether we if you want, we can go ahead and we can create labels like this, or we can make use of the form builder. So I'm gonna say form.label, and what's the name of the label? That's username. In the same way, we can use the form builder to say form.text username. Okay. Now this is basically equivalent to saying input type text, name username, ID username. So basically you can save yourself some time by using the form builder. So if we come back and do a refresh, quickly check out the HTML here, you can see we have a label and a username out here. Next thing what we're going to do is we're going to wrap it inside a form. So we're going to say form.open. Okay, inside it we're going to say the action will be user controller dot store. and here saying form.close. If we refresh it again and come back to here, you can see it basically creates a valid form for us with the right method called post to right URL called /user. And you can see basically you won't have to do that inside your views. All you're saying is the form action should be to this controller and method, and form builder will figure out the URL and the method for you. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to copy and paste it here to have a couple of more fields. And if you're wondering why we have these square brackets here, it's because we're dealing with one and more users. Okay, that's the purpose. It's basic HTML. It has nothing to do with the framework. So password, and here we're gonna say password. Next, we just gonna repeat this row so that we can have two forms. Come back here. I believe all good. Create a heading called user number 2, and here will be a heading called user number 1. If I refresh, you can see we have user 1 and user 2. Let's create the submit button as well. So I'm going to say form.submit, say create users. Okay, we have the submit button too. Let's child it a little bit so that it looks a little pretty. We're going to get rid of the entire CSS we have, and we're going to style it by saying row to have a padding of 20 pixel with bottom to 1 pixel. Solid gray. Then we're going to say form field to have a margin bottom 10 pixels, and quickly form field label should have a display to block. Well, that's all. I know it's not the best form, but still it's gonna do work for us. Next, we're gonna get rid of the footer. Here you can see there is a Twitter and a GitHub icon. We're just gonna get rid of that. Come back, refresh, it's all good now. So if I hit the button called create users, we're gonna get an error called CSRF token mismatch. That's basically a security feature to make sure people from outside are not able to hijack your form. So all you really need to do is call this helper called CSRF field, and everything rest will be taken care of. So if I say submit, you see nothing happens because we are not doing anything inside this method, but we have a form. Now the basic idea is to submit this form to the database and save as much line of codes as we can. So very first, let's talk about the first point. We said getting data the right way. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say response.send request.all. Now all is a method that will give you all the data that's submitted by this form. It's that simple, okay? So we're just going to send it back so that we can see how exactly we are getting data from this form. So I'm going to come back, refresh, and say create users. We get our CSRF token, that's good. Apart from that, we get an array of usernames, an array of emails, an array of passwords. That's good, but that's not consumable. And let's talk about why. When you try to save a user, you need data in a different way. What you need is an array of multiple objects. In this case, it's going to be 2 objects because we have 2 users. And each object should have the username, email, and the password. So think of it as user number 1 and think of it as user number 2. But if you will go back, that's not how we are getting data. We're getting an array of usernames. Ideally, we want an array of a single user, and then like an array of the second user that way. So the traditional approach is to go ahead, run loops, find out the index of the first item, then manually create another array by basically getting this data in right order. Or the other way is to make use of a method called collection, or most probably collect. So I'm going to say constant user request.collect. And what exactly we want to collect? We want to collect all the usernames, email, and passwords, okay? Now this time we're gonna send users here. Refresh, and you can see we get an array of 2 users with their username, email, password, username, email, password, okay? That makes sense. So which means we are able to solve the first part of the puzzle, and that too only in one line of code. Now the next thing is to validate this piece of data. Now ideally what you'll do is you will run a for each loop, grab the username, see whether it's there or not, grab the email, see whether it's email or not, and when you have to check whether this username has been taken by someone else or not, you have to make a database query, and that's going to be an async query. And running async loop, as I said, is not fun. So we're gonna eliminate that step, and we're gonna make use of Adonis Validator. Adonis Validator is not part of the base installation, which means you need to install it from npm. So what I'm gonna do is, I'm gonna say npm I is an alias for install, Adonis Validation Provider. Okay, we have it here. Next thing we need to do is we need to register it to the list of our service providers. Now, anything that's written specifically for Adonis is always going to have a service provider so that you can set it up once and make use of it inside your application without worrying about the configuration and all that stuff. Now, bootstrap/app.js is the file where you basically register all of your providers. Out here, you can see it's a huge array with a lot of providers out here. We're just gonna append ours to the bottom. So I'm gonna say Adonis Validation Provider /providers/validator provider. Now, if you're wondering how actually you're supposed to figure out the string, what you really need to do is go to your node modules, and the module you install, that's Adonis Validation Provider. That's the first part of the string. The other one is the directory called providers. And finally, whatever is the file name. So the file name is Validator Provider. You can leave .js. That's not required. Now, if I open this file, every provider has a namespace. A namespace is a unique reference to that provider. Now, don't worry if you don't understand the namespace, the provider thing. You can check out documentation for that. But for now, all you need to worry about is setting it up with me. So this is the namespace that we need to use every time we need access to this provider. So I'm going to copy it. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to create an alias for it. Now think of alias as a small name for this namespace. So I'm going to say validator and this. Now anytime I need it, I can basically call the alias instead of remembering this big, huge name. Okay. So the validator is the alias. What we can do is we can go to our user controller, say validator, use validator. That is all. Now under the hood, validator makes use of the module called indicative. So if you will go to indicative documentation, you can basically see a basic example on how to validate a piece of data. So it all starts by defining rules. So let's go ahead and define some rules. And for our rules, it's going to be users.all.username. Now, what we are really saying is users is an array. Now, everything inside that array, and grab the username. And I'm going to say it's required, okay? Second, I'm going to say users.all.email. Now, all the emails inside the users array, they are required, and this should be email. And again, let's copy it, paste it here. Say password is required. Now, if you want, you can add validations like min4, max 10, or 20, but we're going to avoid that for now. So now, what next we need to do is we need to use these rules and use this particular array and validate it. Okay, so I'm going to say constant validation yield validator.validate. What's the data? The data is the users, and what are the routes? And we're going to pass them here. Next, we're going to say is if validation.fails, then simply response.send validation.messages. The messages are all the failure messages that happen while validating the data. Yeah, I'm going to return from here. And if validation passes, we're going to say response.send users for now. So we're going to come back, refresh it, and we get our first validation error. Let's start from basically the first point. So if I say username is John and email is John2, and I refresh, it says users.first.username is required, which means basically the first object, and that is the index, and an array starts with a 0 index. In that case, that's going to be the second user. Its username is required. So if I say the username is Joe, now it says the user.0.email is not a valid email, okay? So let's say john@gmail.com. Now it says the email requiring the first user. I hope you got the idea. So what we are able to do is we are able to define rules and we are able to validate the users. Now you'll be thinking, what about the unique validation? All you really need to do is you need to say unique in which table, that's users, and what's the field in that table? They're going to be username. Same is going to be for email, and the users table going to be comma here, and the field name is email. Okay. Now if we go ahead and refresh the page, say create users, it says the username is required. Let's say I enter the username, application crashes, and that's expected. If I come to the console, it says SQLite is not installed, which means while running the unique validation, we are dealing with the database, and every new application of Adonis is configured to make use of SQLite. So if you go to the .env file, that's the place where you manage your environment variables. And if you will check out the DB connection, it says SQLite. Now, the configuration for this connection is stored inside config/database file. And here is SQLite, okay? It says the client we need is SQLite 3, so let's install it from npm. Say save div SQLite 3 here. Okay, so we have SQLite 3 installed. Next thing what we need to do is we need to create this users table. So what I'm going to do is we're going to make use of migrations. So what are migrations first? Traditionally, what you'll do is you'll log into your SQL server, or you will use some kind of a GUI like SQL Pro or PHPMyAdmin. Sorry, that's for PHP people, but a lot of people use it. You're gonna make use of that, and you're gonna create your tables manually. And whenever you want to share those tables with someone else in your team, you're gonna dump your SQL and gonna email them so that they can use it. But that's the naive way of doing it. The ideal way is to create migrations, let them live inside your code, and anytime anyone else wants to use your code, they can make use of those migrations. So let's check out what migrations really are. So if I say ACE, here you can see a list of all the commands. Out here we have one called make migration. So that says create a new migration and whatever the name you want to give it. So I'm going to say A. So A is basically an alias from this. It's an alias on my machine. It's not going to work for you. So you have to say ACE like this. ACE migration. And what's the name? So I'm going to say users. The action we're performing is create on the table called users. It will create a file to this path. So let's go ahead, open it, and you can see we have a class called user schema with two predefined methods called up and down. Now, up method is called whenever you're trying to create a table, alter a table. And down method is called whenever you're trying to reverse that action. Okay, you can learn more about migrations inside the documentation. But for now, we're gonna say the table needs to have a username. Copy it. The table needs to have an email, and table string should have a password too. That's all really we need for the users table. Next thing we need to say is we need to say a migration run, like run this migration. Boom, it says database migrated successfully, which means now we have the users table with us. So next thing we're going to do is we're going to go back. Let's say we create a user called Joe, John@gmail. Password will be John. Oh, this needs to be password. That's my mistake. Let's go back to the view, fix it. Say password. Password here. Okay, refresh. John@gmail, and Joe@gmail, and Joe. Here you see that we have got both of our users because we are able to successfully pass the validation check, which means we are able to solve two hurdles now. First, we are able to get the data right way. Second, we are able to validate it without getting into all those nasty loops. The final one is saving it to the database. So what we can do is we can run a SQL query, or we can make use of database modules, which is basically the implementation of active record. So what I'm going to do is, as always, I'm going to make use of ACE. So if I say A, here is a command called a make model. So I'm going to say a make model. What's the name? User. And we get it to the path called not here, here. So you can see we got the users model. That's all we really need in order to create users. But in order to keep our things a little bit organized, I'm going to basically move these rules to the model. So paste them here. Here I'm going to say static get rules and return an object from here. So that's all good. Okay, that's all we need. So we have a method here called static get rules, and that returns an object of rules that we want to make use of. Come back to the user's controller. We're gonna say constant user use app model user. Now this use keyword is very much specific to Adonis, and it's shipped by an internal module called Adonis Full, which is an ISE container. Now that's a different topic altogether that you can check out the documentation for. What we're going to do is we're going to replace these rules to user.rules. Okay, so problem 1 solved, we got the data. Problem 2 is validation, that's solved too. The problem 3 is to create the user. So what we're going to do is we're going to say saved users are going to be yield user. That's the reference to the model. We're going to call a method called create many and going to pass our users to that method. Okay. Finally, we're going to send our saved users back to the browser. So let's go back, refresh the page. I'm going to say John, John password. User 2 is Joe, Joe@gmail.com, and the password is Joe. And you can see the users have been created because we got these timestamps and their ID inside the database. So let's refresh. This time it gives us a validation error, says the username has been taken by someone else, which means our unique validation is working fine. But there is a problem right now. The problem is we are not encrypting our passwords. So if I open a tool called SQL browser, if I'm not wrong, yep, that is. open it. Not a new database. Open an existing one called AdonisJs. Inside it, form database is a directory, and here is the file. So if we go to the users table, you can see the passwords are plain. We got John and Joe, which is not a good practice. So what we're going to do is we're going to encrypt these passwords this time. And for that, we're going to make use of model hooks. So what we're going to do is make a hook called what? User with an initial method called encrypt password. Oh, we have our hook here. So I'm going to copy the path, open it here, and here is the hook. All we really need to do is we need to say this password yield hash dot make this password. Now hash is basically an internal module that you can import out here on the top. So I'm going to say constant hash use hash. Okay, we're going to make use of it, and we're going to hash our password. Now you basically won't have to worry about whether the password exists or not, because we are taking care of that with our validations. So no one ever going to reach this hook unless they'll provide the password. So assume it's always going to be there. And what we're doing is we are basically mutating it by hashing it. Okay, that's all. That's all we really need to do. Next, what we need is tell our user model to make use of this hook. So I'm going to say static boot super.boot. So boot method is called automatically by Lucid every time you make use of a model, and internally it does a lot of work. So always make sure you're calling the parent boot, and then you're free to do whatever you want. So I'm going to say this dot add hook before create, and what's the hook we want to call? We want to call the user hook and the method call encrypt password. So just like our controllers, the way we refer them inside our routes file as a string, in the same way you can reference your hooks inside your models. So user is going to be the file name inside this directory. Now if you have nested directories, of course you need to pass them. So let's say if you got v1, so that's the directory called my hooks /user. So you need to do that manually, but we don't have any nested directories. We can say hook, basically user dot and the method that we want to call. Okay, that's all. Next, what we're going to do is we're going to basically recreate this table so that we won't have these users anymore. So I'm going to say migration refresh, which means redo everything. Boom. If we refresh here, we have the table, but no more data inside it. So let's come back, refresh. We're going to say John @gmail, John, Joe @gmail.com. It's password, boom, we have it. And you can see it's basically a bcrypt password. And if you come back to database, do a refresh, you have the encrypted data, basically passwords. So that's really nice. Basically, inside our controller, in one line, we are able to solve the first problem in how many? 4 or 5? Yeah, 5 lines, and we are able to basically validate the user. And basically, in one line, we are able to create multiple users, encrypt their password using a hook, and this is really awesome. Next thing what we need to do is we need to display the errors. So if I go back to create user, I get an error back as a JSON response. We don't want that. We want to display these errors to our form itself. So what we really need to do is we need to flash the data back. Now flash is basically a terminology which means sending data inside sessions only for a single request. So which means whenever we want to send data to a single page only for one time, we make use of flash messages. Now flash messages can have anything. They can have errors, they can have form values, They can have some card details, whatever you really want to send to them. Out here, what we're going to do is, here, I'm going to say yield request.flash, not flash, basically with all, and with, that's going to be errors, validation dot messages flash. That's all. And instead of saying send, I'm going to say response dot redirect back. Back means wherever the user came from. So what we're doing here is we're saying request dot with all. With all means when you say request dot all, now whatever you get from that method, basically send that back inside the session as a flash message. Okay. And on top of that, append this custom object as well and flash everything together. That's all, really. So if we go back, refresh, say create users, it says validation of message is not a function. Yep, that's messages. That's my bad. Say refresh. Boom, we are back to the same view, but we cannot see anything because we are not making use of these flash messages. So what I'm going to do here is out here on the top, let's create a div called errors. Okay, with an li inside it. We can create a UL too. That makes more sense. Okay. But here I'm going to say for error in old errors. And out here, I'm going to say int for. Now, old is a helper method which will fetch basically an object for you inside the flash messages. So if you will go to the controller, here you can see we have an object called errors. And out here, we are basically getting a reference to that and running a loop on top of it. And we're going to say error messages. Simply display that. Let's make it a little tidy. Okay, refresh, say create users, boom, we have it. It says the validation field on first users that have an index of 0 inside the array. That is really nice. Next I'm going to say John. It says now the other username is required, but as you can see, we have lost the first username, and that's really bad. So which means if I say, like John, and put the email here and submit the form, I don't have the access to the old values, which means the user will have to re-enter it. And again, that's not a good user experience. So what we're going to do is we're going to make use of this old method to fetch the value of the username. That's so simple. So here I'm going to say old username.0. That is all. So if I say John, submit the form, we have the John back. In the same way, old email.0, let's copy it, and say password.0. We're gonna be username.1 because this is the first index. Here are gonna be email.1, and here, actually we should not pre-fill the passwords. That's not a good practice. Okay, so if I say John @john.gmail, submit, yes, we have their name and email back. In the same way, if I say Joe, I submit it, we have it back. Then if I say joe@gmail.com, we need the passwords, enter gibberish, and gibberish, submit. It says the username has already been taken. Why don't you become John1 with a password of John1? You become Joey1. We need to change the emails too with a password of Joey1. We submit and we get our users back. That is all that we really need to do. So as you can see, how easy it is to basically deal with complex things of getting data the right way, validating data with async behavior, and basically creating multiple users, doing dry stuff by encrypting their password. That's all from this video.